No, we're not. There we are. So welcome back to Senate Economic Development. We are back in this in our workforce development bill, H703, and this is a new proposal which has been generated by the actual original author of this bill, working in conjunction with a consult with several other people. This long-time concern about workforce development is that it's an octopus without a head, or a symphony with many sections without a conductor. The sections are all playing their own tunes. They're not in the same tempo, and they're not in tune. This is a proposal. This is a proposal that we are going to tee up with Kate Ash, who is a consultant on workforce development issues nationally, and then we're going to talk to Tristan, and we have a draft proposal, and we have your diagrams, Kate, to pass out whenever you're ready for me to pass them out. But I think I'd love to have you introduce this idea to our committee and introduce yourself, if you would, and tee it all up for us.
Wonderful. Well, good morning, everyone.
You're muted, or
no,
she's not.
Huh. We can't. Okay, try again.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Excellent. Great. Well, that's what I get for not being there in person. Well, good morning, everybody. It's nice to see so many familiar faces. As the Senator mentioned, my name is Kate Ash, and I am a native Vermonter and an independent consultant. I actually specialize in advising states on how to transform their education and workforce systems to prepare for the workforce needs of the future. And just as a bit of context, I've been very deeply engaged in the development of this legislation, but also with the state's education and workforce systems throughout my career. Among my previous positions, I was a Deputy Irene Recovery Officer in the Shumlin administration, and most recently I was Senator Leahy's advisor on education and human services. So today I'm really pleased to offer some testimony in support of what I think is a really bold and ambitious effort on this committee's behalf to build a resilient workforce. I just want to start out by just highlighting a couple of challenges facing Vermont and Vermonters. And I mean, I don't need to necessarily tell this committee, but that the changes in demographics, the roadblocks to education and training, especially for those that are underserved, low workforce program participation, and the changing skill demands, all of these are some of the most common trends in state workforce systems right now. And we are already seeing the impact of accelerated automation brought about by the pandemic. And this is really prompting new strategies, innovative strategies across the country. When I spoke to the House committee earlier this session, I offered several strategies employed by other states to address these very same challenges. Chief among them was the centralization or the centralized coordination of education, workforce, and economic development resources to meet the critical workforce shortages and align investments with longer-term state economic trends. Many states, and I'll highlight a couple of them today, have found that the pandemic in particular has necessitated an expanded model for governance. These states are evaluating and restructuring statewide education and training systems. They're aligning state agencies and partners in new ways, and they're aligning resources and brand new federal resources especially, and their infrastructure toward a shared vision that builds continuous on and off ramps to education and training, which I know this committee has talked a lot about. Throughout my testimony today, I'll be highlighting several models and some corresponding case studies for how Vermont and this committee may consider aligning state leaders toward the shared vision for success. And I know that the senator recently passed around some visuals. You'll see 10 transformations, 10 pathways and 3 transformations for preparing the state workforce for the future. I was the lead author of this particular report, and I'm going to be really focusing on, first and foremost, that first pathway, really, which is kind of the first step to the entire pie there, which is around aligning leaders toward a shared vision. The first model I want to highlight is a new office of workforce transformation, particularly housed in the governor's cabinet. I'll use Nevada as an example. Nevada established in 2016, first by executive order, and then codified in state statute the year later, the Governor's Office of Workforce Innovation. GOIN, as it's called, was directed to drive a skilled, diverse, and aligned workforce. Now, this office in particular has 11 full-time staff and an executive director. keep in mind, Nevada has 3 million people, so quite a bit larger than our lovely state of Vermont. But together, this team carries out a variety of functions very similar to the ones that are proposed in the legislation. In particular, they manage the state's workforce development board. They manage regional industry sector councils. They develop and manage the state's industry recognized credential list, and they lead the state's workforce research data system. The GOIN also supports a number of very responsive interagency projects. One in particular that I think would be of interest to this committee is that GOIN actually collaborates with the State Department of Education to integrate skills-based training into middle and high schools and engage employers. They also have really been at the forefront nationally in the expansion of apprenticeships into fields like manufacturing, healthcare, and technology. I know one of the concerns often for setting up a new office like this is just adding new staff. One thing I would love to just touch on here with the Nevada example in particular is that based on the first 5 years of success, the governor actually signed a bill establishing an administrative relationship with all of the other agencies and departments in which GOIN operates to share HR and financial management support. And as a result of that, they were able to decrease staffing costs and many of the administrative burdens that come with standing up new offices. The other thing I would love to just touch on is that GOIN, as a result of the increased capacity that they've been able to provide the state, they have successfully, within their first 5 years, they have procured more than $20 million in federal grants. These grants are supporting the alignment of resources and reduction of barriers to education and training, one of which it was around state apprenticeship. There's a rural healthcare grant, and even a $14 million grant. It's really around reimagining the entire state workforce system, and especially for BIPOC individuals in certain industries. So, I offer this as just one example, and I'm going to just share my screen briefly to just give you a bit of a visual aid of what this looks like in this particular state. And I know you have some visuals in front of you as well. As you can see here, its core strategies and activities include scaling apprenticeships, assessing workforce policies, designing career pathways, leveraging labor market insights and workforce data, and validating industry recognized credentials. You'll see the key partnerships there with the governor's office, of course, leading that integration. And of course, there's a component of the WIOA state plan. So again, I just offer this as another visual aid. I'm very much a visual learner.
If you'd send that to us, that would be great. We don't have this visual with us. It's not in their packet.
Scott, is that up on the site?
It is.
Okay, great. I will make sure to send that out as well. The other thing I would love to just, touch on when it comes to the advantages, as well as really the prerequisites for this, the advantages of this type of office, based on the few offices like this that I've worked with, is that they're statutorily directed. They have authority to develop MOUs and real convening power. As I've mentioned, they can build capacity and long-term buy-in, especially when it comes to procurement of additional funds that are simply not available within the state. The other thing is that they do not rely on just one agency to lead coordination. And this is particularly important, I think, in a state as small and insular as Vermont, where there's an incredible amount of opportunity to be leveraging the partnerships that already exist. The other thing is that it's directly connected to the governor, and in particular, being able to advise the governor as well as work with partners to advance that strategy in a very strategic and aligned way. The other thing I'll just mention about this too, which I think will be of interest to this committee, is that this strategy adds direct capacity to the state workforce board. In many states, the state workforce board lacks capacity. It lacks professionalism, maturation, and without real full capacity behind these types of boards, that lack of coordination simply doesn't exist. And so by really pairing this type of office with oversight and management and support to that office, there's a greater degree of professionalism as well as engagement from the business community in the state. The second model I just want to touch on very briefly is short-term collaboratives or task forces. And I actually want to touch on this. I know this is not in this legislation by any means, but I know often when I've talked to states about this, they say, well, rather than setting up a new office, what if we do a short-term collaborative or a short-term task force? Colorado has recently done this with what's called the Colorado Ready Collaborative. They actually launched the CRC to develop and maintain accountability, but that was specifically aligned to the state's very, very robust recovery plan. And so the collaborative is really intended to, in the short term, execute the state recovery plan and implement strategies outlined in state and federal stimulus proposals. In this accountability system in particular, it's prompted a lot of new shared standard, state education and workforce program alignment with longer term economic needs. I think it's important to just point out that some of the prerequisites and even potential risks to this model is that there's no funding and that there's there's very limited capacity. And in Colorado in particular, this work has relied on what is arguably one of the strongest state workforce boards in the country. The State Workforce Board is the convener of this work, and they have nearly a dozen staff and are very, very integrated, really, I would say, recognized as a national leader in their work. The other thing about, these short-term collaboratives and task forces, as I know this committee will be familiar, is that they are likely to be sunsetted. They're not going to be sustained following a governor's term and really most often result in a culminating report and recommendations and are not as action-oriented. And of course, I think the most important risk really in this type of model is that they lack authority and are really unlikely to be able to take a deep dive into issues on performance management. The third model I just want to touch on, again, for similar reasons, is new pilots or memorandums of understanding. This is sort of a third tier, so to speak, of how states have chosen to align state agencies. In particular, I've been working with the state of Washington that has been leveraging very short-term small grants of less than $100,000 to add capacity to their existing state workforce board that is already fully staffed. They've been working with contractors to develop MOUs to align some of their state agencies toward a shared vision around education and workforce development. But their work has been focused very, very, I should say, narrowly on data sharing and new governance. And due to limited capacity, their focus has not included really performance related to WIOA, but really piloting new efforts within state government. The challenges for this team in Washington, I was just on the phone with them this week when they were outlining some of the struggles they were facing, is just getting people on board without statutory authority, without real kind of leadership and demonstrated from the governor's office. There's no directive for the players to contribute, and so success has been arguably pretty limited and quite expensive. Also, depending on who owns this type of initiative, and in this case, it's the State Workforce Board. Without engagement from the governor's office, it's very much seen as a project of the State Workforce Board without any authority or incentives for players really to partner. The last thing I just want to mention sort of in closing is that I think is the committee really considers the most appropriate model to address the challenges facing Vermont. There are a couple of, I think, urgent kind of opportunities in which Vermont has a real place to play a leadership role. States that are facing a shortage in skilled workers, and specifically those related to demographic challenges like Vermont, cannot hire their way out of a workforce shortage. They must train their way out. And this begins by first assessing the existing education and workforce landscape to identify gaps, map existing assets and resources being leveraged, and then leveraging new data to identify skill needs in partnership with employers and businesses. And ideally, this work should happen either before or concurrently with the launching of new programs, new branding efforts, development of new regional or industry councils to make sure that those investments are really aligned with the longer term needs of the state. I think as a final thought, this level of coordination is incredibly timely, especially important when the state can anticipate millions of dollars in new resources from the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Bill. For those who are less familiar with this legislation, the IIJA will require states it will invite states to apply for new funding for training, alignment, and develop of digital equity plans, among other things, that include millions for training and education programs. And really this relies on the state to have capacity to apply, which first requires capacity to align and really implement these types of plans and coordination effectively. So I hopefully, I offer this as just a couple of examples of, the types of models Vermont might consider. I think this proposal in particular is very well timed, bold, ambitious, and a wonderful step forward. So I'll pause there and certainly welcome any questions.
Thanks. I think Tristan, does it make sense for Tristan to present and
I'm
then
happy
for us
to
to
have
open
any
the questions?
questions for Kate go first and then I'll come in after, but
Because we're on the floor in 25 minutes. So I mean, I just think it would be great to get our presentations and then our questions after. So
okay.
Tristan, why don't
Well,
you
so
dive
I
right
think
in?
I'll just build off of, thank you, Kate, for the
Kate, thanks so much. We're gonna dive into
really
this.
wonderful teaming up. And I'm also monitoring my phone because S210, which I think you all had a hand in, is on the floor and facing potential votes and divisions and such. So,
Yeah, we'll hear that.
well, we'll hear the roll call, but not necessarily divisions and
Okay.
all that. So I promised them I would be alert. So Kate really, I think, set out the larger question here of the moment. And I want to acknowledge upfront that I've been on the state workforce board for 8 years. Prior to that, I was on one other study around our workforce system in Vermont in my first biennium here. So now for 10 years, I've been in this space to some extent. I believe that we need sort of systemic reform, if you will, in our thinking and our structures at every level. I have been working very hard, but unsuccessfully so far, and I'm fine with that. I'll keep working at it. For us to build the bottom up part of the system, the distributed impact across regions and across all stakeholders part of it. But I also think we need to rethink what we're doing at the top down. And so this proposal, we noodled on this when the House had possession of 703. I think you all know the House Commerce Committee worked with multiple committees. I introduced 703 as the longest short form in the history of the House. It turned out to be a 10-page short form bill, but it was truly a short form bill. There was no statutory language. It was just an outline with the 8 strategies that we could look at for systemically thinking about workforce in a different way. And I said, I tried to create a vehicle for you all in Commerce to work with all the committees that are worried about workforce, emergent workforce issues, and to try to bring something together. And, they did an incredible job of trying to do that. It also broke our systems in ways that were unexpected. It was very difficult for Ledge Council to pull all the different committees into one bill, and it was complex for the Commerce Committee. And so this idea was being noodled on as an evolution of the idea that I had embedded in the original outline. But it's simply, they ran out of time to evaluate it, and decided, here's what's complete, we'll send that to the Senate, we'll keep talking. So I think that there's an opening for House Commerce to also be open to this question and this approach. And I think a couple other things that I've been thinking about. 5, 6 years, 7 years ago, I've lost track of when. One of our efforts in restructuring was we made the Commissioner of Labor the head of workforce under the governor. So the governor, of course, is ultimately accountable for workforce, both because of the way that the federal RIOA funds have the governors as the senior workforce leader for RIOA funding, but just, we preserved that, but we said, Commissioner of Labor, you are the head of workforce. And I think we did that with the best of intentions, but actually on some levels, what I think this reveals in my thinking is an opportunity for us actually to think about the different levels at which things happen. And the Department of Labor is a crucial part of our delivery system. We try to make the commissioner also sort of the strategic leader. And I don't think that that was the right fit. I don't think that that agency, the way it's currently structured, and where their responsibilities lie, they have aspirationally tried to meet that need. They have, and they've asked for more resources, and the House gave them a pilot of a potential regional program. So that it's not that they have done nothing to try to meet that need, but at the larger sort of systemic level, we have AHS has the Creative Workforce Solutions program, voc rehab. There are workforce programs in ANR. The Agency of Education has all the Perkins 5 money and the Perkins 5 plan. And so if you think about, and we have the WIOA workforce plan that was approved through the State Workforce Board reviews it. It was approved by the governor and submitted. So we have at least 2 strategic plans, Perkins 5 and WIOA, in different agencies of government that are equals and that are partners in trying to work collaboratively to get the whole system more integrated. But ultimately, I do think that there's a missing coordination and potentially direction layer that is missing. And that's where I think the Office of Workforce Innovation comes in. I think it will allow all of the service delivery system at AOE and other places to be really focused on service delivery coordination, alignment, efficacy, and for a very quick and direct pathway to the governor at the cabinet level to say, how do we deal with the tangles, the inevitable tangles that emerge across state government? So that's one piece, and then sort of this internal view of workforce. But one of the things that I also wanted to name for you, and I'm sure it's come up, is at the macro level. So Vermont has, according to Matt Barowitz, a couple of weeks ago, he shared this with the House Appropriations Committee. Vermont has the largest gap in the country and the number of jobs listed versus the people that we have to fill those jobs. So we have the worst sort of workforce shortage in the country. On the nursing side specifically, we have the worst by like 2.5 times the second worst state. So that's why there's so much in 703 that's targeted nursing. But I wanted to understand, having been inside, if you will, this workforce system conversation for almost 10 years, I wanted to understand contextually, like, where does the Department of Labor fit? All of these pieces fit, to Allison's point of the octopus. What is the octopus? And how does that compare to what we're hearing, I think, from our constituents who are saying, where's the state of Vermont? And so I asked, I asked Sarah Buxton, our workforce director at VDOL, was the auditor's report in September accurate about the number, the approximate caseload of the Department of Labor for WIOA funding? And she said it's off by maybe 10%. And she said, in addition to that, we have other people who we serve who are not WIOA eligible. And I said, what's the total universe? And she said, in a non-pandemic year, about 8,000 people are served by Vermont Department of Labor. Separately,
8,000 eligible?
8,000 individuals are served in an average year by the Vermont Department of Labor. About 6,200 to 6,500 of those are WIOA eligible in some way. I went to the JOLTS data, that took me to the census data, but ultimately Matt Barowitz confirmed that the data I was using, he felt comfortable with my data source and my number. And so I looked at what's the total universe of hiring decisions that happen in Vermont in any given year. So that's the lived experience of organizational leaders who are, or business owners who are trying to navigate workforce. Workforce is not a service delivery system for them. It's, am I finding the people that I need? Are they qualified? Are they connected to the kind of training and skill development that I need to have to meet my needs? So what's the total universe there? It turns out that there are about 200,000 hiring events a year, that the churn in our economy is about 62% a year. And so if you think about, even if those 8,000 individuals served by the Vermont Department of Labor represent more than 2 of the hiring events a year, that's still only sort of 10% of the individuals, probably somewhere in that range. It's soft. people could be hired multiple jobs multiple times, but just, in terms of just a really quick gut check, that says to me, okay, all of our effort, all of our thought around how to do this service delivery and do it better is still a tiny piece. So how on earth do we bridge to a place where our strategic development of our Perkins plan, our WIELA plan, our service delivery models, our resource allocation, policy changes, educational policy changes, all the investments in surfacing credentials of value and career pathways, all of these things that are happening in the workforce space.
The tentacles.
All the tentacles, how do we ultimately have more visibility out there in the full system that people are experiencing? And the State Workforce Board, by federal charge, is kind of supposed to do some of that, but it's under-resourced, and it's been very difficult for the State Workforce Board to serve in that way. And so I think my conclusion is that actually creating this office, having the State Workforce Board aligned there, having the poor lost stepchild adult CTE also in some meaningful way, if possible, be connected there, moving the charge to be workforce strategic leaders from DOL to this office. And I haven't looked at the draft, but I do think if the House and the Senate agree on this concept and we move to the finish line with it, I think we want to make really clear that this office should not be the ones to do all of the small, like, local meetings. They should be looking at the strategic level and advising us on how we develop a system that does an incredible job of service delivery, coordination, and quality, and starts to address this systemic gaps in our system, very much in alignment with all of the kinds of examples that Kate brought up. And I think that becomes their charge, and they can use the State Workforce Board, the adult CTE, and all of the other parts of the service delivery system to help them accomplish that and bring to us, here are the tangles that we're discovering. Here's where it's hard. Here's where we have real gaps.
Here's where it's duplicative.
Here's where it's duplicative. Although I will say, I don't expect a lot of duplication personally, partly because we owe so much of what we've done, from what I can see, is we have seeded programmatic activities across the state in alignment with core WIOA constituencies that are required under the WIOA Act. And so those are really interesting narrow slices that are geographically dispersed, but if you get a long list together, it looks like it's all the same. It is not all the same. And my guess is that Sarah would be able to confirm that by and large, we're not duplicating effort, but there's a different question of whether our effort is sufficient for the need we have. What on earth we do to deal with the 2,000 or so Vermont kids who are graduating high school every year with no credential of value, no post-secondary plan, no military service, and are literally going out into the workforce with no supports from us. I believe that in the 18 to 24 range, there are 48,000 Vermonters currently in that situation. Many of them are in some process, so that's not a conclusive statement. But we have got to get our brains around all of these things because we have the worst gap in the country and it's holding everything back. How do we build housing when we can't get skilled carpenters, when we can't get plumbers, when we can't get electricians? How do we, grow a technology company like Beta Technologies, when we don't have the kind of pathways to meet those needs? And then I came out of the food service industry. The food service industry is trying to figure out how to reinvent itself, reinvent its business models, reinvent everything. They're finally recognizing pay and benefits and all of these other things, but they also need to be able to access talent pipelines that will support getting people in there. We no longer have NECI. That was a transformative pipeline provider that transformed the state of Vermont.
NECI. Yes, we're missing NECI.
And we have some programs at the high school level, but then nothing in the middle. This is all systemic, strategic. It's super complicated and detail oriented as well. But but we need to take this step. It's time.
So Tristan, I love your passion. I want to believe you. I really do. I want to believe you, Kate. You've been doing this for 10 years. I've been working on this for 8 years. And then we were doing stuff with workforce in Windham County even before I was here. I want to believe that this will help us move forward. As you've talked about, these were students that I had. They don't want to do anything else. We graduate them. They don't know where they're going next. Give us some assurance that this will actually finally close this loop, because I feel like we've been talking around the drain for
So I think
years.
to bring back my old philosophy thing, I think there's a distinction between necessary and sufficient here.
Yep.
And I think we have to do this. And this is one tiny piece, but in that we have to have that distributed network of people committed to building a different workforce system. We have to have the service providers aligned. There is I think you have an image of an upside down triangle. Like there are many layers to this work. So I don't think that this is not a savior move. And I want to be really clear about it, but I think it is we do not get to the next step without also addressing it at the systemic structure level of state government. And I rarely would advocate for a leadership as the answer, but in this case, I think leadership is a part of the answer, and we can do it now.
That coordination and alignment which leadership can provide. Keisha.
So I'm struck by thinking about, for example, the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston working cities challenge, working communities challenge up here. What they will say is that coordination and alignment helps communities absorb more dollars. So like the concept is not lost on me, but then they can point to specific examples of Fitchburg, Massachusetts has leveraged, 10 million more dollars because of this level of coordination, like 100 million more dollars. I mean, they have their case studies and examples of what success looks like. And so to build off of Senator Ballin's question, I feel like we need to see some examples of where this dramatically turned things around, or even 10%, of an increase of some metric that shows that this is a worthwhile investment, that in 2 years we can say, here, yes, it's unfair to sort of measure like fully what success looks like, but have a sense that we're going in the right direction. And that I don't see in here. And I've told this to others on the committee, but I think many folks in our business community have been saying for a long time, can we reinvent the Department of Labor? And I hear you saying, we started to, and it is not working. How are we sure that instead of doing a full transformation and calling it, the Department of Workforce Development and Innovation, or, talent generate, what are other states doing with their Department of Labor? Because otherwise, when I look at this chart, I just see Department of Labor barely has, it feels like a new role in this. And so I'm not worried as much about something new, but all the other things that we're funding that are also competing to try and do the same thing. The new Office of Engagement at UVM wants money so that they can be the leader in some part of this. DOL, this is DOL's job.
And
if they're not doing it, that's
but
a bigger
here's the
problem.
thing: is it's not just DOL's job, because the Agency of Education has all the Perkins 5 money and plan.
Yeah.
And that is,
CTEs.
and in CTEs, and so Voc Rehab and Creative Workforce Solutions are huge out there in the workforce. Part of the conversation for many, many individuals. Like that's where I think the problem is. Yes, I think it will move the dial a little bit here, but I think it sets up all the work that we need to do to really address what do we want in a workforce system. Because what we have right now is we have a WIOA system.
Yeah.
And we call it our workforce system. We have a WIOA and Perkins system.
And we're underperforming big time on the WIOA front.
And like our CTE numbers are lower than the high-performing states and more expensive. You know, we have 17 different business models at the CTE level. We have very low adult CTE participation. Like, we've got to get to that level of strategic thinking. I think it's my,
I'll follow up with
yeah,
you.
yeah.
No, we're
My ideal vision was essentially a collective impact model.
Mhm.
I don't think we as a legislature can get to a collective impact model this year. But let's at least address the systemic problems of service delivery within state government and pick up the conversation in January about how do we get closer to a collective impact model, which I think is really what you're saying in different words.
So, yeah, I mean, I can keep an open mind. I can
That's what
spend
we're
$1 million,
asking.
and there's huge demands on that $1 million, right? For mental health supports and continuing education here and there anyway, so if we put $1 million towards this, or
We're
1.5
not even
million.
asking for that.
It's like half that.
It's $500,000, $1
Okay,
million.
it says $1 million
So that's to Department of Labor to do the work they want.
for their regional, okay, so this is 500,000 for this office.
To set up the, okay, Kate, we need to go to the floor. Do you have one last thought before we go to the floor?
Sure, I do. I wanted just to touch on Senator Ram Hensdale's just comments about the just wanting to understand how other states have addressed this and sort of just what their performance looked
Yeah.
like. If I may, the one I can certainly send some more, research, and I'm trying to lower my hand here, not give myself an applause. The first I would just like to touch on is Missouri. Missouri in particular, they actually have an extremely well-led, recently combined Agency of Education and Workforce Development. Now, they have gone through major restructuring and have also one of the strongest workforce development boards in the country. So, however, that office has been leading this statewide coordination for years and years, and it has been very much driven with leadership from the governor's office. They have been implementing many of these strategies, and what they have developed is actually a performance attainment goal, not unlike a credential attainment goal in the state of Missouri, where they've actually seen massive increases in the number of individuals that are using their programs, including businesses, and they've been able to leverage millions upon millions of dollars that has otherwise been left on the table. Alabama is very similar, and I want to mention this because they are probably the key example.
Kate, I hate to interrupt you, but we would love to come back and talk about other states, but we need to be on the floor in 2 minutes. So I apologize. This is you two have been. This has been great, a great start, and we're all. This is just the introduction of this idea, and one for us to be thinking about. And if it's possible for us to get the models of other states, that would be great, I think, for us to see, and or if you were willing to come back and chat with us about it on Tuesday or at some point when we take this up next. And we may be meeting Monday, but it's unclear. So thank you both, Tristan and Kate. It's great to see you, Kate. And Tristan, thank you for teeing this up.
Oh, yeah,
This is, you will, I hope, be available for further consultation.
absolutely.
Great, and we